living through the beginning of the end. I know how that sounds. People have predicted the end of the world for thousands of years. Every generation has had its wars, its disasters, its prophets, its collapsing empires, and its frightened people staring into the darkness and wondering whether they are witnessing humanity's final chapter. But something about this moment feels different to me. It isn't one disaster that frightens me. It isn't one war, one disease, one economic crisis, one political leader, or one technological invention. It is the accumulation of everything. It is the feeling that problems that once appeared separately are beginning to converge. I look around and see a civilization that has become enormously powerful without becoming equally wise. We can communicate across the planet instantly, yet millions of people feel completely alone. We have access to more information than any civilization in history, yet nobody seems to know what to believe. We have machines capable of performing tasks that once seemed impossible, yet ordinary people increasingly wonder whether there will even be a place for them in the economy of the future. We produce extraordinary amounts of wealth, yet countless people live one emergency away from financial disaster. We have built cities filled with millions of people, yet people walk through those cities without knowing the names of their neighbors. Something has gone wrong. And when I say that, I am not simply talking about politics or economics. I am talking about the human spirit. The world still looks normal. That is what makes this period so strange. If the world were obviously ending, perhaps people would behave differently. If the sky suddenly turned black and alarms began sounding everywhere, there would be no confusion about what was happening. But that isn't what I see. I see people waking up in the morning. I see buses running. I see restaurants serving dinner. I see packages arriving at people's doors. I see people scrolling through videos, arguing about celebrities, buying clothes, complaining about work, making weekend plans, and wondering what they are going to eat tonight. Civilization continues performing its daily routine. And yet, underneath that routine, I sense enormous instability. It reminds me of standing inside an old building and noticing cracks appearing in the walls. The electricity still works. The water still runs. People still live inside it. But the cracks are there. One crack might not frighten me. 10 cracks would. And when cracks begin appearing everywhere at once, eventually I have to ask whether the foundation itself is moving. That is how the world feels to me now. I see exhaustion everywhere. I don't only see economic problems. I see exhausted people. People are tired of working, tired of worrying about money, tired of politics, tired of social media, tired of bad news, tired of pretending that you're doing better than they actually are. Tired of trying to keep up with a society that never seems satisfied. Everything demands attention. Everything wants money. Everything wants a password. Everything wants a subscription. Everything wants an opinion. Everything wants us to move faster. And somewhere in this endless acceleration, human beings seem to be losing the ability to simply exist. I think that matters. Civilizations aren't only held together by governments and banks. They are held together by millions of ordinary people believing that tomorrow is worth participating in. People have to believe that working matters, that raising children matters, that building something matters, that saving money matters, that following the rules matter, that sacrificing today might produce something better tomorrow. But what happens when people stop believing that? What happens when millions quietly decide that the future isn't going to be better? That is when something deeper begins breaking. We have lost our sense of permanence. There used to be things people assumed would still exist tomorrow. A career, a neighborhood, a local business, a community, a newspaper, a church, a factory, a family tradition. Maybe none of those things were perfect. Maybe many weren't. But they gave people a sense that the world had continuity. Today, everything feels temporary. Companies disappear. Jobs disappear. Technology becomes obsolete. Neighborhoods transform. Relationships dissolve. Institutions lose credibility. People move constantly. Businesses open and close. Entire industries can be transformed almost overnight. Nothing feels permanent anymore. We have become accustomed to instability. And perhaps that is one of the most dangerous developments of all. Human beings can adapt to almost anything, even chaos. If something shocking happens once, everybody notices. If something shocking happens every week, eventually people barely react. Another crisis, another disaster, another scandal. Another war. Another record. Another emergency. Another warning. Another historical event. The words themselves begin losing meaning, and life continues. Technology is moving faster than us. Then there is technology. I don't hate technology. I use it. Almost everyone does. But I cannot ignore what has happened. For most of human history, technological change moved slowly enough that people could build their identities around a certain way of living. Now the world can change within a few years. Artificial intelligence alone forces me to ask questions that would have sounded like science fiction not long ago. What happens when machines can imitate human voices, human faces, human writing, human art, human conversation? What happens when nobody can easily distinguish between something created by a person and something generated by a machine? What happens to trust? What happens to employment? What happens to identity? What happens when technological systems become so complicated that ordinary people cannot possibly understand the infrastructure controlling their lives? We are building extraordinary tools, but sometimes I wonder whether humanity is still controlling the tools or whether the tools have begun controlling humanity. Look at people walking down the street. Look at people sitting in restaurants. Look at people waiting for trains. Heads down. Screens glowing. Thumbs moving. Millions of people connected to everything and somehow disconnected from the person standing beside them. If someone from hundreds of years ago suddenly appeared in our world, they might think we were performing some kind of religious ritual. Everyone staring into little illuminated rectangles, waiting for messages, waiting for approval, waiting for stimulation, waiting for something to happen. Something has happened to community. This is another thing I cannot ignore. People seem lonelier. Not everybody, but enough people that it has become impossible for me not to notice. There are people with hundreds or thousands of online connections who have nobody they feel comfortable calling in the middle of the night. People live beside each other without speaking. Families scatter across enormous distances.
Friendships become text messages. Dating becomes profiles. Entertainment becomes personalized algorithms. Shopping becomes packages left outside the door. Work becomes remote. Food becomes delivery. Human interaction becomes optional. Convenience has solved countless problems. But sometimes I wonder what it has quietly taken away. A person can increasingly live without interacting deeply with another human being. That should frighten us more than it does. Because civilization depends upon relationships, trust, cooperation, patience, compromise, shared experience. A society filled with isolated individuals may still look like a society from the outside, but internally, something essential has disappeared. The earth itself feels unsettled. Then I look at the natural world. Heat, floods, fires, droughts, storms. Changing seasons, environmental destruction, species disappear, water problems, food insecurity. I don't claim that every unusual weather event is some supernatural sign. That would be too easy. But I also refuse to pretend humanity can endlessly alter the planet without consequence. We have built a civilization dependent upon enormous systems of extraction, production, transportation, consumption, and waste. Everything arrives magically on shelves. Food, electronics, clothing, medicine, furniture, fuel. But behind every product is a chain stretching across the planet. Mines, factories, ships, trucks, warehouses, workers, energy, water, land. The modern world feels effortless because most of us never see the machinery keeping it alive. And that machinery is enormous. If enough pieces begin failing simultaneously, our illusion of permanence could disappear very quickly. Money has become another source of fear. I see financial anxiety everywhere. Housing, food, insurance, debt,
education, transportation, healthcare, retirement. People calculate everything. Can I afford this? Can I afford that? Can I move? Can I stay? Can I retire? Can I have children? Can I survive an emergency? Can I lose my job? Money has always mattered. But there is something psychologically corrosive about living in constant financial uncertainty. A person cannot think about civilization's future when they are worried about next month's rent. And maybe that is part of why everything continues. Everybody is too busy surviving their individual crisis to examine the larger crisis. We are all putting out little fires. Meanwhile, the forest is getting hotter. I don't think the end happens in one day. This is where people misunderstand me when I talk about the end of the world. They imagine explosions, asteroids, nuclear war, some enormous final event. Maybe, but I don't think the end necessarily arrives like that. The end of a world can happen slowly. The Roman world ended, but there wasn't one morning when everyone woke up and received a message saying Rome was finished. Systems weakened. Institutions changed. Borders shifted. Trade changed. Authority fragmented. Generations were born into circumstances their grandparents would barely recognize. The old world faded. A different world replaced it. That may be what we are experiencing. Not necessarily the literal extinction of humanity. The end of a way of life. The end of assumptions. The end of institutions. The end of expectations. The end of the world as we understood it. And that can be terrifying because nobody knows what comes afterward. I keep watching people pretend. Sometimes I think denial is one of humanity's greatest survival mechanisms. We have to believe tomorrow will resemble today. Otherwise, how would we function? We make appointments for next month. We sign 30-year mortgages. We save for retirement. We plant trees whose shade we may never sit beneath. We make plans. That faith in tomorrow is beautiful. I don't want humanity to lose it. But faith in tomorrow cannot become blindness toward today. Something is happening. Too many people feel it. They may describe it differently. Some call it economic decline. Some call it climate crisis. Some call it technological disruption. Some call it political instability. Some call it spiritual emptiness. Some call it loneliness. Some call it cultural collapse. Some call it the end times. Maybe all of these people are touching different parts of the same enormous thing. Maybe humanity has reached one of those moments when history changes direction. And I wonder what comes next. That is the question that keeps returning to me. What comes next? I don't know. And anyone who tells me they know exactly what the world will look like 20 years from now seems far too confident. We have entered a period where prediction itself feels fragile. Technology could transform society. Wars could redraw alliances. Economic systems could change. Climate pressures could alter where people live. Political movements could rise and disappear. Entire professions could vanish while new ones appear. Humanity could solve problems that currently seem impossible. Or we could create problems we never imagined. That uncertainty is what I feel most strongly. The ground beneath civilization seems to be moving. Most people are still walking as though it isn't. This is only the beginning. I am not here because I want people to panic. Panic accomplishes nothing. I am writing because I believe attention matters. I want to look differently. I want to look directly at the world instead of hiding from it. I want to understand what is happening to our communities, our economies, our technology, our environment, our relationships, and our minds. Because if this really is the end of an era, then I want to witness it consciously. I don't want to sleepwalk through history. I don't want to spend the final years of one world staring at meaningless distractions while another world is being constructed around me. Maybe humanity survives all of this. Maybe we adapt. Maybe the future surprises me. Maybe the future surprises all of us. Maybe what looks like an ending from where I stand will eventually be remembered as a beginning. But right now, standing here and watching everything accelerate, I cannot shake the feeling that we have crossed some invisible line. Behind us is the world we knew,
Ahead of us is something none of us completely understands. And somewhere between those two worlds, here we are, watching, waiting, trying to live ordinary lives during extraordinary times. And this is everywhere I look. I see signs that something is changing. I don't mean signs written across the sky. I don't mean that every storm, earthquake, war, or strange event is automatically a prophecy. I mean something much simpler. I mean the world doesn't feel stable anymore. I wake up and look at what is happening around me, and I keep coming back to the same question. How much longer can all of this continue? Because eventually something has to give. I can feel the pressure building. There is a pressure underneath everyday life now. People feel it even when they cannot explain it. You can hear it in conversations. You can see it in people's faces. People talk about money constantly. They talk about jobs. They talk about rent. They talk about crime. They talk about war. They talk about artificial intelligence. They talk about politics. They talk about the weather. They talk about how strange everybody seems. They talk about how quickly everything is changing. And eventually, somebody says something like, "What is happening to the world?" I hear that question more and more. I ask it myself. Because this doesn't feel like one ordinary historical period following another. It feels like acceleration. Everything is happening faster. News moves faster. Money moves faster. Technology moves faster. Rumors move faster. Fear moves faster. Anger moves faster. Even our attention moves faster. We barely have enough time to understand one crisis. We barely have enough time to understand one crisis before another one replaces it. We have become addicted to crisis. This might be one of the strangest parts of modern life. We are surrounded by emergency. Something is always breaking. Something is always unprecedented. Something is always about to happen. Somebody is always warning us. Somebody is always outraged. Somebody is always terrified. And because we experience so much of it through screens, enormous events begin to feel almost ordinary. A war appears between advertisements. A natural disaster appears between comedy videos. Economic anxiety appears between celebrity gossip. Someone discusses the possibility of technological unemployment, and 10 seconds later, I'm watching somebody review a hamburger. Everything has been flattened into content. Tragedy and entertainment occupy the same little screen. Sometimes I wonder what that is doing to us psychologically. Human beings were never designed to absorb the suffering of an entire planet every hour of every day. For most of our history, a person knew what was happening in their village, maybe their region. Occasionally, news arrived from somewhere distant. Today, I can know about an earthquake thousands of miles away almost immediately. I can watch a war unfold while sitting in my bedroom. I can hear predictions about economic collapse while eating breakfast. I can see environmental destruction while waiting for a bus. And then I'm expected to put the phone away and continue my ordinary day. How could that not change us? Nobody seems to trust anybody. This is another sign I cannot ignore. Trust is disappearing. People don't trust governments. They don't trust corporations. They don't trust the media. They don't trust politicians. They don't trust experts. They don't trust institutions. Sometimes they don't even trust their own families and neighbors. And once trust disappears, society becomes much harder to hold together. Civilization depends on invisible agreements. When I walk into a store, I assume the money in my pocket has value. When I buy food, I assume somebody has made sure it isn't poisonous. When I enter a building, I assume somebody inspected it. When I get onto a train, I assume somebody maintained it. When I put money into a bank, I assume it will still be there tomorrow. I cannot personally verify all these things. Nobody can. Modern civilization requires enormous amounts of trust between strangers. That is why the collapse of trust worries me. Because once enough people believe every institution is lying to them, every disagreement becomes a conspiracy. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every stranger becomes suspicious. Every compromise becomes betrayal. A society cannot survive indefinitely when everyone believes everyone else is trying to deceive them. Politics has become identity. Politics used to be something people argued about. Now, for many people, politics has become something deeper. It has become identity. People don't simply disagree about policies anymore. They question each other's morality, intelligence, humanity, motives. Entire groups of people look across society and see enemies. That frightens me. Because history shows what happens when human beings stop seeing opponents as neighbors and start seeing them as threats. The language becomes harsher. Anger becomes easier. Compromise becomes weakness. Eventually, nobody is trying to solve anything. They are trying to defeat somebody. Meanwhile, the problems continue growing. Debt continues. Housing problems continue. Environmental pressures continue. Technological disruption continues. Loneliness continues. Infrastructure ages. People struggle. But instead of addressing those problems together, we scream at one another. Sometimes I wonder whether division itself has become a form of entertainment. The machine never stops. Then there's the economy. More sales, more customers, more productivity, more consumption, more clicks, more engagement, more profit. Every year must somehow become bigger than the year before. I look at that system and wonder where it ends. The planet isn't infinite. Human attention isn't infinite. Human energy isn't infinite. There are limits. But our economic imagination often seems incapable of accepting limits. We have built an enormous machine that must continue moving. Millions of people wake up every morning because the machine needs workers. Factories produce. Trucks move. Ships cross oceans. Servers process information. Stores sell. Banks lend. Consumers borrow. People buy things they need. People buy things they don't need. Then everybody wakes up and does it again. I participate in it too. Almost all of us do. That is why it is so difficult to criticize. We are standing inside the machine while trying to understand it. We have more things and less peace. This contradiction fascinates me. Humanity has produced extraordinary abundance. Look around, an ordinary home. Lights, running water, refrigerators, televisions, computers, phones, air conditioning, medicine, food transported from across the world, information available instantly, entertainment available constantly. A person from 500 years ago might consider some of these things miraculous. And yet, we aren't walking around in permanent gratitude. People are anxious. People are depressed. People are lonely. People feel behind. People compare themselves constantly. People feel unsuccessful because somebody online appears to have more. The finish line keeps moving. Get the apartment, then get the house, get the job, then get the promotion, get the phone, then get the new phone, get attention, then get more attention, get money, then get more money. At what point do we finally say enough? Maybe we don't know how anymore. Something is happening to human attention. I think attention may become one of the great issues of our time. Everybody wants it. Companies want it. Politicians want it. Influencers want it. Advertisers want it. News organizations want it. Apps want it. Our attention has become an economic resource. Every second I spend looking at something can potentially be monetized. So entire industries have become incredibly sophisticated at keeping me watching. Scroll, refresh, click, watch, react, repeat, and gradually the mind becomes accustomed to constant stimulation. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Boredom becomes unbearable. A few minutes without checking something begins to feel strange. I wonder what happens to a civilization that can no longer sit quietly. Because silence is where reflection happens. Silence is where people confront themselves. Silence is where difficult questions emerge. Maybe that is why we avoid it. I see people losing their sense of meaning. This might be the deepest problem. People need meaning. Money isn't enough. Entertainment isn't enough. Consumption isn't enough. Human beings need to believe their existence matters. We need relationships. We need purpose. We need responsibility. We need belonging. Something larger than ourselves. For thousands of years, religion provided much of that structure for enormous numbers of people. Community provided some of it. Family provided some. Work provided some. Tradition provided some. Today, many of those structures are weaker. And nothing has completely replaced any of them. So people search. They search through politics. They search through spirituality. They search through careers. They search through relationships. They search through fame. They search through money. They search through the internet. They search through endless self-improvement. Everybody seems to be looking for something. But many don't know what they're looking for. That spiritual emptiness concerns me more than anything else. Because a civilization can survive poverty. It can survive wars. It can survive disasters. But what happens when people stop believing life itself has meaning? The old rules don't seem to work. I grew up hearing certain assumptions about life. Work hard. Save money. Be responsible. Build a career. Eventually, things will work out. There was always a future hidden inside those instructions. You sacrifice now because later would be better. But younger people increasingly look at that bargain and question it. They see housing prices. They see debt. They see unstable careers. They see automation. They see environmental uncertainty. They see institutions they don't trust. And they ask, what exactly am I building toward? That question matters. Because civilization requires people to invest emotionally in the future. People have children because they believe there will be a future. People build businesses because they believe there will be customers tomorrow. People study because they believe knowledge will matter later. People save because they believe their savings will have value. The entire structure depends upon tomorrow. When faith, everything changes. Maybe this is what an ending actually looks like.